There is a building that has been painted bright Pepto-Bismol pink, and you can see it if you visit the main drag of the Fondren District in Jackson, Mississippi. If the color doesn't give it away, maybe the protesters will. That pink building is the only place in the state of Mississippi where a woman can get an abortion. The only one. And since protesters are not allowed to harass patients in front of the clinic, they've started to harass anyone they see outside the restaurants and coffee shops in the area.
Time to turn to Jesus Christ today.
This Facebook video shows protesters, one with a sign that reads, "Repent or perish."
They're literally screaming at customers just because they're having a cup of coffee, and the police, for whatever reason, from higher up, they want to arrest them.
In response, Glenn and others have filed affidavits to charge those protesters, but even then, nothing is done. Glenn says Jackson police officers told him the higher-ups say not to do anything for fear of a lawsuit.
If you're an individual who needs an abortion in the state of Mississippi, getting one can be incredibly difficult. And if you're someone who lives or works nearby, so can getting a cup of coffee. The Supreme Court has allowed restrictions on where and how abortions can be performed, who can perform them, what kind of abortions are actually allowed. And because of that, abortion laws vary widely, state by state by state. And with only one abortion clinic in the entire Magnolia State, 99% of Mississippi's counties don't have a clinic, forcing 91% of Mississippi women to travel, some of them a long distance. Once they get to Jackson, they need to find somewhere to stay overnight because there's a mandatory 24-hour waiting period after their first consultation at the clinic. At that consultation, they must receive counseling that includes information designed to discourage them from having an abortion. They must get an ultrasound for the fetus they aren't planning to carry to term, and the provider must offer the patient the option to look at the image. Unless they have a private health insurance plan that pays for their abortion, it's likely they'll be paying out of pocket. State health exchange insurance plans and those for public employees only cover abortion in cases of life endangerment, rape, or incest. And that doesn't include all of the hurdles the clinic itself has to jump through in order to provide abortions. States like Mississippi are doing everything in their power to make abortion, if not illegal, then all but impossible. The Jackson Clinic almost closed in 2013 because of a law that required abortion providers to get hospital admitting privileges, a hugely unnecessary and burdensome thing to make a clinic do. But the law almost worked. Almost. The clinic went to court and won. It is still open. Then a few years later, in 2018, the Republican-dominated state legislature in Mississippi passed a law that bans most abortions past 15 weeks. Meaning even before a fetus is viable, even before it is capable of living outside the womb. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that a state may not prohibit any woman from making the ultimate decision to terminate her pregnancy before viability. So the Jackson Clinic decided to go to court again, to sue in an effort to get this law overturned. The Supreme Court is on their side, right? It's illegal to force a woman to keep a fetus that isn't even viable. Yet. Well, changed in the Supreme Court in the last 3 years since Mississippi passed that law in March of 2018. Brett Kavanaugh joined the court. Sure, swing vote. Susan Collins of Maine said she believed he would defend Roe v. Wade, but he's already ruled in favor of abortion restrictions. And there's uber conservative Amy Coney Barrett, who is only on the court because Mitch McConnell said there was one rule when a Democratic president is in his final year of office. Sorry, Merrick Garland. And another when it's a lame duck Republican. She was confirmed in just 31 days. Every lower court has ruled in favor of the Jackson Clinic on viability. Even conservative justices have recognized that Roe v. Wade and a later decision, Casey, prohibit total bans on abortion before viability. So what is the new 6-3 majority conservative Supreme Court with Barrett and Kavanaugh on it going to do? If the justices already agree with the lower court's decision, why did they even bother to take the case instead of just letting the lower decision stand? Supreme Court watchers and activists on both sides think this could be the case that changes the rule on viability and abortion access. Many are wondering tonight if this is the case that ends Roe v. Wade for good. For more, let's bring Ian Millhiser and Fatima Goss-Graves. Ian covers the Supreme Court as a senior correspondent for Vox. Fatima is president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center. Thank you both so much for being here. Fatima, let me start with you. Why are these laws, like the one in Mississippi, at the center of this case, and the one that Texas Governor Abbott is expected to sign into law any day now, why are these called heartbeat bills by the conservatives who introduced them, who passed them? Why is that language important?
So these laws should worry all of us, and the fact that the Supreme Court took it should worry all of us too. They have basically tried to go after Roe versus Wade, which basically said that abortion is legal in this country up until the point of viability, that a state cannot pass a law saying you cannot have an abortion before viability. So this is an effort to go at that case, Roe, and the 5 decades of Supreme Court precedent that has agreed with Roe again and again and again.
Ian, for almost half a century now, the Supreme Court has said states can't ban abortion before a fetus is viable, no matter what the ideological makeup of the court. What makes this moment and this court different? Why did everyone seem to sit up and take notice when the court decided to hear this case today?
Yeah, I mean, the court we have now is more politicized and more partisan than it has been at any point in recent memory. Republicans have been willing to pay any price at all, break any norm, burn any bridge, turn their party into a wholly owned subsidiary of the Trump organization in order to gain control of the Supreme Court. And now that they have it, if you have paid that much, I do not think that this Republican-controlled court is going to stay its hand. I mean, this is something that matters a great deal to the party. It matters a great deal to the individual justices who are there. I mean, Kavanaugh, Barrett, as you noted in your intro, are both very outspoken opponents of abortion. And so I can speculate as to what the opinion is going to say. I don't think it's necessarily going to contain the words Roe v. Wade is overruled. But even if it doesn't, I think the Supreme Court is likely to give states so much freedom to restrict abortion that we are probably soon going to be living in a world where in many states there just aren't going to be abortion clinics.
Fatima, I wonder if both you agree with Ian's analysis about the political moment that we're living in, also then what that makes you think about all of the onlookers who throughout the last election said, oh, don't worry about Roe v. Wade. People are being ridiculous when they say that Roe could be overturned. And then other onlookers said, well, it may not be Roe itself, but it may be this chipping away at access that we're now watching happen. If the Supreme Court decides in favor of the state of Mississippi in June, can you briefly describe for me what will happen to abortion rights in places that seek to ban abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected, but a fetus is not yet viable?
Well, first, people around the country should be worried that the Supreme Court has agreed to hear this case, because there's no reason for it to have done so. It goes directly at the heart of Roe. So the idea that at least 4 justices voted to hear the case is really worrying. And what we know is that states around the country have raced to pass copycat versions of the Mississippi ban. And if Roe actually fell, there are about 24 states that have what we call trigger bans, which basically say they would ban abortion immediately if Roe was overturned. So the fact that people have anxiety around this case is with good reason. But here's what I will say as a lawyer that I can't help but hold on to, and that is the Supreme Court would have to tie itself into outrageous pretzels and totally disregard 5 decades of precedent to decide that this Mississippi law should stand. So that will have implications not just for Mississippi and the people who live there and for access to abortion care. It will have implications for the legitimacy of the court itself. So I hold out a little hope that the court does not want to blow itself up in that way.
I mean, Ian, all of this is happening as people are trying to read the tea leaves on whether or not Justice Breyer is going to consider retiring. There, of course, was a piece today about how that looks unlikely. Can you talk to me just a little bit about sort of this 1-2 punch of knowing that the court is going to be looking at this case, and then also this news that looks like Breyer is not leaning in favor of retirement?
Yeah, I mean, who knows what Breyer's thinking, but like the leaks that seem to be coming out in the rumor mill suggest that he's got this very grandiose notion that the court should not be politicized, and it would be very, very wrong if he, as a Democrat, were to strategically retire under a Democrat, because that would cause people to think that maybe the court was political. And I mean, it's nice to live in fantasy land. Like, I like to make pretend too, but like, the court is politicized. We are there. The Rubicon has been crossed. And, you know, I just hope that Justice Breyer isn't the one person in the country who refuses to admit that to himself, because we have this incredibly powerful institution. It is going to do extremely dangerous things. I mean, and not just on abortion rights. I mean, I'm terrified of what they're going to do to things like voting rights. And if Breyer is replaced by another Republican, I mean, it's going to get really bad.
Fatima, I'd love for you to pick up on what Ian was talking about there, which is there is a connection between these attacks on reproductive justice and these attacks on voting rights. What do you see as the through line that connects them?
You know, there's no accident that these attacks on abortion access, which are both anti-democratic, but also rooted in a really ugly racist history of controlling the bodies and the lives of Black women in particular, that you're seeing those sprout up in the same states. You're seeing it in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia and Missouri and more. And they're anti-democratic ideas. When you ask people if they want to take away access to abortion care entirely in your state, that is not a mainstream idea. 70% of people in this country support access to abortion. And so we're in this terrible situation where you have a court that is giving signals that feel very hostile to things like abortion, but you also have a small but powerful group of politicians determining our lives and futures in ways that are not consistent with what people in this country want.
Ian, I don't know that we can have this conversation without talking about Senator Collins for a moment. In announcing her decision to vote for Kavanaugh, Senator Collins said she was confident that Kavanaugh would follow precedent on Roe v. Wade. Yet, as I mentioned, Justice Kavanaugh already voted with the minority against striking down Louisiana's restrictive abortion law. Is there any reason to expect he'll stick with precedent here?
Yeah, I mean, I would never seek legal advice from Susan Collins. Like, you know, I wish that she had bothered to familiarize herself with Justice Kavanaugh's record before she had voted for him. But I mean, that said, there is one thing that I am a little worried about, which is that, like I said, the court might not necessarily write the words Roe v. Wade is overruled. Like, we could get an opinion, and the court has handed down opinions like this in the past, which allows states to impose very strict limits on abortion, but like still pretend like the abortion right is still something that in theory still exists. And I mean, this is something I'm very conscious of as a journalist, because when the decision comes down, I want to be able to write honestly about what happened. And if the court has left some abortion rights in place, then I want to write honestly about that. But if the court has effectively nuked Roe v. Wade and is trying to pretend like it's doing something else and trying to give Susan Collins cover to say that it did something else, you know, I hope that everyone who is covering the court and everyone whose job it is to communicate what the court is up to, you know, tells the truth. And just says, look, like, yes, the court said this stuff about how Roe v. Wade is still technically good law, but the practical impact of this decision is there is no longer a right to an abortion.
I find so much of this fascinating. One of the things I find fascinating is that you've already seen this move within the reproductive justice community away from framing everything around Roe v. Wade, in part because my generation, millennials, it is not as resonant for them. So it'll also be interesting to see what that response looks like. Ian Millhiser, Fatima Goss-Graves, thank you both so much for getting us started.
Hi, I'm Mehdi Hasan. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more of The Mehdi Hasan Show by clicking on any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thank you for watching.